sang this song to me. There was a message in its melody, sweetest lyrics that I ever heard. There's a message in the songs of birds. Tomorrow is another day. Living is the only way. Tomorrow's gonna ever come. Listen to the words of the song. Everything gonna be alright. Everything is gonna be.
Greetings and welcome to A Sip of Inspiration. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, known as the Empowerment Doctor, and I want to thank everyone who took the time out to listen to this either live or even as a broadcast replay. So thank you very much. You know, I depend upon that, and always I love your comments. So a little housekeeping before we get started. So website is champagneconnection.com. So go out to the website, look around there. My new book, Self-Esteem, Your Superpower, Ways Parents Can Help Improve Their Children's Self-Esteem, is available on the website, as well as on Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, and any place else you buy your books. Also, there's some cool merchandise, so be sure you get yourself some very cool merchandise. I want to thank our sponsor, Rise. So when you need an equipment company or a supply company that will rise to your needs, be sure to contact Rise. They've been a sponsor for every episode, and we are absolutely grateful for that. So with that, I want to introduce our guest. I think she has a very interesting topic, and that's telecommuting psychosis. Well, it has a longer name too, and I'll let her go through that with you, but I'm interested in that. And I want to thank Dr. Frieda Wiley for joining us today. So thank you very much. I'm giving you a round of applause here because I think it's great that you just could take this time to actually share your story and talk about your book with us, because I know that is something that everybody can actually benefit from. So a little bit about her is that she's a licensed pharmacist turned freelance medical writer and medical journalist who has written for the O, which is the Oprah magazine, U.S. News and World Report, Merck, and the National Institutes of Health. She's recently based in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So thank you for joining me, and I know everyone is excited. So tell us some more about yourself, and we want to talk about your book and where people can get it.
Sure. So thank you, first of all, for having me. It's an honor to be here. And thank you for giving me this platform to discuss what I feel is a very important topic in just so many areas of mental health. As you said earlier, I am a medical writer and a medical journalist. So what that means for people who may not follow that, because it can mean many things actually, I, in a nutshell, take complex scientific and medical concepts that are hard for the everyday person to understand who may not come from a medical background and make it easy to understand. And in certain cases, I make it entertaining depending on what the business need is, right? And I also do the same thing for medical professionals. So I also create content for medical and scientific professionals who are looking to update their medical skills or their expertise in a certain area, or they're conducting research in a certain area and they want information, or I create presentations at the corporate level. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
Okay, that sounds incredibly exciting, especially the part about making it so that everyday ordinary people can understand it. So what made you decide that you wanted to enter into that field?
Yeah, so I think medical writing is one of those interesting professions where no one really wakes up and says, oh, I know what I want to be when I grow up, a medical writer. Instead, it was something I fell into. So I loved writing as a child and I excelled in it. But then as I got older, I began thinking it was impossible to make a living as a writer. And then when I was in pharmacy school, I had some internships in the pharmaceutical industry, and that's when I was introduced to medical writing because I supported the medical writing team for one of the projects that I was assigned. Mm-hmm. And even though I didn't pursue that straight out of pharmacy school, I practiced in a traditional pharmacy setting, working initially in a drugstore and then later for a company that supported insurance. And during that time, I tried to freelance, and it was kind of hard because as a pharmacist or healthcare professionals in many situations tend to work very long hours.
Mhm.
So after I, like many people in the healthcare industry, reached burnout, I took some time off and I began exploring what could be possible to make a career out of this.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then the book was born.
Yeah. So the book, I originally started writing the book in 2014. So let me back up a little bit and say that I've been a pharmacist for almost 13 years. And I have been a telecommuter almost as long as I've been a pharmacist, even when I worked in drugstores as a traveling pharmacist, meeting with patients. So I would work from home 1 to 2 days a week to catch up on my paperwork. And then when I transitioned into the insurance industry, as I mentioned earlier, I became a full-time telecommuter accidentally and overnight. When I initially was offered that job, I thought I was going to have to move to greater New York City or New York City for the job. And then when they found out that I had some hybrid remote experience, they pitched me the idea of working from home. And I thought that there'd be no difference, but there was a huge difference in working from home 1 to 2 days a week versus every single day. So I read every single book I could get my hands on at the time. I talked to the few people I knew at that point who had worked from home. All of them, except for one, as I recall, had gone back into an office because they could not, it just wasn't for them. I won't say that they couldn't handle it. That's too strong of a statement. But I saw a deficit because there really was no information about how working from home affects your mental health. And the books and the articles that I read, anything they said about mental health, if they mentioned it at all, would basically be a one-liner saying, oh, if you're depressed, get outside, go for a walk. But the reality is, yeah, getting outside, getting vitamin D, fresh air, exercise, that's great. But that doesn't necessarily address the loneliness, the isolation, the depression that can settle in, sometimes just starting to invent things because you haven't really interacted with people. So I started journaling about my feelings and my experiences. And then as research became available, namely during the COVID-19 pandemic on how working from home affects your mental health, then I had the facts to back up the things that I was experiencing finally.
So when you started researching this, you found that, I'm thinking back when I first worked from home, when I was working, you're right. They don't address the loneliness and all of that. And taking a walk is nice, but it's still, and sometimes you just kind of miss people, right? So you're right. So I'm glad you did that. So after you did that, and you did this research, so what prompted you to put it in a comprehensive place like a book?
Well, so originally, like I said, it was journaling for my own therapy and self-help.
Okay.
And I didn't really want to put it in a book at first. I had other books in me, but I didn't want that to be my book because I'm sharing something very personal, and you have to understand, especially during 2014, mental health was stigmatized. But then I began to realize that, well, wait a minute, I have a story here. And even if I don't really want to go public with this and admit it, it will help somebody else. Because part of the challenge is, even though our society is becoming more comfortable with having these conversations about mental health, there's still a big stigma around it. And there's still, some hesitancy in coming forward, especially when it's something that people haven't really talked about a lot. So to be clear, telecommuting psychosis is not an official clinical term. But in my years of research, there was not any catch-all phrase to describe all of the challenges associated with working from home. The closest thing I found was techno-stress, but that's really a term to describe the stress associated with the use of digital devices. So that still leaves out some of the other aspects.
So has it become more accepted as a term since your book hit the market? Because sometimes all it takes is for someone to write a book and give it a name, and then they say, oh yeah, that's it. So
I haven't seen that yet, but that's what I'm hoping for. Kind of like, well, some people don't like it, but the term geriatric millennials. So one person came out and said it, and then it was off to the races. And sometimes people feel that I think the term geriatric bothers them. I am a geriatric millennial. That term doesn't bother me. I actually relate to it because we're in that strange cusp between the two generations. So I thought actually it fit perfectly, but that's just me. So we'll see. Time will tell.
So the full title of the book, it's really interesting. So it's Telecommuting Psychosis, From Striving to Thriving While Working in Your Pajama Pants. And that describes it perfectly, because I don't care what people say. We were all in our pajama pants there for a while.
Yeah.
So do remote workers feel more supported given the great return to the office?
That's an interesting question. And I'm finding from my experiences in interviewing different remote workers during this time that it's kind of a mix. We do know from just the media and major discussions that many organizations have actually started to dial back the resources that they had put into place to support the remote workers during the pandemic with the great return. I think that there are many people who've continued to work from home, whether full-time or in a hybrid capacity, who have kind of started to establish some ways of working that work for them. I also believe that one of the most important things, again, is the candor, the fact that people can come out and talk about it now. And there's a level of understanding and compassion that remote workers began to receive during the pandemic that was unprecedented. And some of that has lingered.
So now we seem to be back sort of in a hybrid, though. So even going back to work several more days a week, it doesn't sound like that's going. We still don't have anything in place for when you're sitting at home isolated, because most people now are at home 3 days a week, or maybe 4, and then they're only in the office for 1. And I often think, God, there's no work getting done on that one day they're in the office, because you're just so excited finally to see people like you. So what kind of things do you think they should think about, employers, in order to make it better? What was your experience?
So my experience, I've continued to be fully remote, first of all. But from everyone I've interviewed in the research that I've done, again, the support is needed. There are some people who do feel that they don't have the resources in place. But when it comes to specifically in the fully remote environment, as you mentioned just a minute ago, one of the most important things to help people stay on track and feel supported is to make a plan. So it's kind of like the saying that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Mm-hmm. So a plan can really help people stay on track. It can help them manage their time, not only as it relates to workplace productivity in the remote environment, as well as in the office, actually, but also when it comes to making sure they have that work-life balance, mm-hmm. making sure that they try to maintain or simulate some of the infrastructure that was put into place for them during the pandemic. So the different get-togethers, support groups, a check-in, having an accountability partner, co-working spaces, if you have the kind of remote job that allows for that. So for me as a healthcare professional, when I was practicing, and this is something that is common for other healthcare professionals, when they're involved in patient care, you can't necessarily pick up and go to a Starbucks or the library or sit in the park and work when you're handling health information, right? But there are certain remote jobs that do allow that kind of flexibility. So really making sure that you're doing that, making sure that you're also being self-aware. So a lot of this still falls on the worker. Right. You have to do your home ergonomics adjustment to make sure you're not creating neck and eye strain. You have to make sure that you're taking breaks, standing up every 20 to 30 minutes, and not only to do 5 minutes of exercise or something to prevent heart disease, but you also should be taking breaks for your eyes and looking at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds, right?
Right.
So it's kind of been a mix, but in many cases, people have really had to exercise their own due diligence to be the captain of their ship.
Exactly. And it seems like it's at the very beginning, it seemed like we were all just trying, like you said, just trying to figure out, not knowing what to do. And thank God for the internet, because they did give you some good suggestions about that. Because I can remember not moving out of the chair for like 14 hours. It's like, no, I can't keep doing this. I've got to move. Right. But those are things you don't really think about.
Yeah. And so I think that's the other part of it. It's important, like you said, to have access to social media and just other people. It's good to find out other people's hacks, because at the end of the day, nobody knows it all. Even though I wrote a book about it, I don't claim to have all the answers. But I wrote the book as a resource. So yes, it was therapeutic, but I also wanted other people to know that they're not alone, and to try to give them some sound bites to guide discussions. Like if they want to have a conversation with their physician or a qualified mental health professional or a support group or whatever, something to where they wouldn't have to go hunting for all these bits and pieces. I tried to put as much as possible in one place for them.
Okay, so next question is, can every employee or consultant thrive in a remote workplace? Why or why not? And everybody says, at least everyone I know, is, oh God, I don't want to go back to the office. I just want to stay back home. But what happens to them if some people are in the office and then they're remotely by themselves?
It depends on the person. It's working from home, even though obviously it's work, so it's professional. It's also a very personal experience. You learn a lot about yourself in the process. So it depends on your personality, and it also depends on your job. So as a writer, I am introverted by personality to some extent, but I also have to spend a lot of time being very focused for my craft and create thoughts and whatnot. So someone like me, I do thrive in this environment. Once I learned how or established a way to thrive, right? It was not easy. In the beginning, I did not. I was just surviving. But someone who's extroverted and likes to be around people and lives for that water cooler gossip and just other things that go along with the in-house role, those people sometimes find themselves struggling a little bit because they're gregarious, they're social butterflies. They like to be around people, and that's what energizes them. Mm-hmm. So part of it is knowing yourself. So what energizes me? What environment gives me the most inspiration? And if the answer is in an in-house role and being in a very social, interactive environment, then remote work may not be the best fit for you. And that's totally okay. And in fact, I tell this story in my book where I talk about how a few years after I had left that first fully remote role, I ran into one of my coworkers. And initially, I was the only remote employee in my department, but he went remote about a year after I did. And he'd moved on to another company and said, Frieda, I'm glad I got this experience. I learned a lot, and now I know what it's like, but it's just not for me. I miss being around people. I miss the buzz. So,
right.
Yeah.
So what are some of the myths about telecommuting?
There are many, but I'll try to pick a few key ones. One myth is that you're not working or you're barely working.
Oh, yes, that you're barely working. That's right.
Yeah, when in many cases, nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, when you are efficient and you have minimized distractions, then you can find that maybe you work faster, get a lot more done. But there are situations where you may find yourself working harder and longer. Also, during the pandemic, many people said that their bosses gave them more work to do.
Yes.
So yes, you have this newfound time initially, you think, because you're saving the hours on the road commuting and whatnot and all the things that go with it. But all of a sudden, there was no extra free time because it was replaced with additional deliverables. So that's one thing. The other part is people think that you're living the life, that you have the dream job. Not to say that it can't be the dream job, but as I mentioned earlier, I didn't have that flexibility of being able to jump up and go work at Starbucks when I felt like it, or just because I was tired of staring at the four walls of my office. And I didn't have the schedule flexibility. So that's the other thing. Not all remote jobs are created equally. So there are some that have that flexibility. Not all remote jobs are fully remote. So oftentimes when people are looking for roles, especially during the pandemic that were fully remote, some of them were surprised to learn that, okay, I thought this was a fully remote job, but actually I have to travel 80% of the time. Or or it may say that it's remote, but it's only capturing just a small nugget of the true deliverable.
Oh, I can see how that happens, and you're right. Every employer, even departments in this with the same employer will have different rules, expectations, and deliverables. So it's not as clear cut as going into an office from 8 to 5 and leaving and then having that hour lunch break. I never thought about that before. I mean, yes, I know there seems to be a lot more work. People are working longer, and that their employers don't think they're being productive. But the other part is really interesting. So what are some of the signs that working from home is beginning to affect a person's mental health? For everyone who's listening. And for those who are listening, you need to get ready to write these down, because generally our mental health is being affected before we know it.
Yeah. And that's something I experienced, and other people have shared similar sentiments. So kind of like what happens with some other mental conditions, where you'll notice a change in your behavior. It may sound crazy if you have not worked from home still yet after 2020, but if you notice that you haven't gone outside in several days, you haven't left the house, especially if the kids ride the bus to school or walk to school or something, that's a sign. Like you're not engaged in your usual activities, lack of motivation. You start to perhaps overanalyze thoughts. So for example, especially if, let's say, you got the job remotely without interviewing in person, and I actually met people who fell into that situation prior to 2020. Sometimes if you're not used to it, you may read too much into an interaction, and then maybe you start to basically blow that particular interaction out of proportion, and it starts to basically take on a new life. And it really, what the reality is nothing of the sort. So kind of like a grandiose idea. Also, if you've noticed that you may have other signs of depression or isolation. So maybe you're a stress eater, and you start to find that you're not eating well or eating the way you used to. Maybe you're not eating as much. You're forgetting to eat. You're glued to the computer. Trouble sleeping, trouble getting out of bed. Some of that could also be linked to the blue light exposure during abnormal times of day, because the blue light that comes from digital devices after the sun has set, that can disrupt our sleep. And that can also cause other health issues, in addition to being terrible for our eyes. So there are so many things that will happen. And it's important. Honestly, I recommend that people kind of keep a diary, especially when they first start working from home, and kind of notice what your habits and patterns are. When are you logging on? When are you logging off? How many breaks did you take? Are you exercising? Are you eating well? Are you still maintaining your usual social activities? So are you still getting together for cocktails or happy hour once a week the way you used to? Are you still in your networking events? So when you document that, that makes it even easier to notice that, hey, I'm kind of deviating from my usual self.
That's a great idea because it happens before you know it. But if you're journaling it, it also help you remember, well, I didn't exercise yesterday, so I must exercise today. And in some cases, God, am I wearing the same clothes? Because no one sees me. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot happens before you realize it. So a diary is a great idea. My next question is, where can people get help if they're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, depressed, or any other mental stressor associated with telecommuting?
Yeah. So there are mental health professionals. There are associations also for mental health, like the NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness, has resources if you go to their website. 988 is also a national number now, it should be, where you can dial in, and it's really, it was started as a suicide hotline, I believe, but they can still assist you with other mental health challenges. So I just want to put that out there because I don't want people to think that, oh, I shouldn't call or I can't get help.
Okay. And what are some steps people can take to go from surviving to thriving in a remote environment? That's the cool part of the title. So there is hope.
Yeah. So one of the things that I recommend is a focus on the inner self and the spirit. So I realize not everyone may have a religious belief or a spiritual belief, but just when you first get up in the morning, just sitting in silence and meditating, or maybe it would be journaling for you, or taking a quick nature walk, going outside. And even if it's cold outside, just taking a few deep breaths and observing your surroundings before you go back in the house and start your day. Set your intentions for the day. Positive affirmations. I used to keep positive affirmations on my desk and on the wall, on the calendar. I even subscribed to this magazine. I think actually it's called Thrive, come to think of it. It's kind of ironic. And maybe it sounds a little cheesy, but it has like all sorts of little positive affirmations and suggestions on how to live your best life. And understanding that joy and peace, happiness, contentment, all of those things, that's internal. So the world can be crumbling around you, but if you can find that centering, that inner peace, then yeah, you'll know that yeah, this is a sucky situation, or maybe this is a challenge, but that is a mindset shift that's going to help you overcome and go from surviving to thriving.
So how many of those techniques did you use in your experience? Because everyone needs to use at least one. So for those who are listening, I'm a big fan of journaling. So we're already best friends here. We like journaling. So which ones did you use that you found the most helpful?
Spending a lot of time in meditation and prayer.
Okay.
The journaling. Spending time in nature. So I didn't talk about that as much, but for me, nature is just so soothing and centering. It brings me such peace. So, and there have been studies that show that spending time out in nature can reduce stress and blood pressure.
Okay. So for those of you, take a walk, find some nature, some trees, and in the spring, in most places, and even in some places in the winter, nature is really, really beautiful. So I really recommend it, along with the journaling. I think journaling is a good idea too. So what's the most important thing that you would want someone reading your book to know?
That number one, that there's no shame in saying, I don't feel well, something's not right with me. And there's no shame in getting help. But the admission is the first step.
Right. That's true. So in this writing world that you love to do, what would your next project be? If you could write anything you wanted to write.
Well, I have some children's books in the works right now. And that was something I was working on before trying to finish this book. And right now that's my passion, because I really want to inspire and educate young children.
That's fantastic. So where can we get your book?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon. You can also go to my website, so drfriedawiley.books.com. You can get it from there, or friedawiley.com. You can find it there. And it should be coming to some independent bookstores near you in the near future.
Okay, and is it available paperback or ebook?
Great question. So it's a paperback and ebook right now.
Okay, and I like ebooks, but I think we need a book, like people need a book like this one at home, so that you can open up that page to remind you to journal, remind you to get up and walk around or something. So now that you have written this book, and I know you said you liked to write when you were young. So your children's books, what kinds of things do you think you would want to write for children?
So I'm working on a couple of book projects. Some of them are actually rehashing some children's books I wrote as a child that are still kind of relevant. One is about an adopted child finding her mother, only to lose her again, but the spiritual lesson in that. And I'm working on a children's book series. So a few years ago, I was writing articles about women who had run for president before Hillary Clinton, at the time that Hillary was running. And I am working on a book along the two books. Victoria Woodhull was the first woman to run for president. And there are some books about her, but I haven't seen any children's books about Charlene Mitchell, who was the first Black woman to run for president. And she passed, unfortunately and ironically, about a month ago. So that, and then also Patsy Takemoto Mink, who was the first Asian woman to run for president.
Oh, that's going to be very, very interesting. So do you have a publisher, or do you self-publish?
Self-published, but I mean, if the right publisher comes along, I would entertain the idea.
Fantastic. And you're going to make sure these new books are available on Amazon also?
Of course. You're holding me to it now.
That's right. Now I'm holding you to it. I think that those books really do need to be written, and those voices that need to be heard. We need to, because not many people know that there were that many women who ran for president before Hillary. I was alive when Shirley ran. So, as I call her Shirley, like we're best friends, because I always say, "Oh, she's my best friend."
I caught that.
That's right. I was little, so I remember that, but you just don't remember it, and there's nothing anywhere that ever talks about it. So, and women, we need to know that women are active everywhere.
Yeah.
So, when you're thinking about writing, what makes a good story to you? What's one of your favorite books that you've read?
Favorite books that I've read?
Yeah.
Yeah. There are a few. What makes a good story to me? I like being entertained, something that holds my attention for sure. I love gorgeous writing. So sometimes I'll read a book and I'm reading it more for the writing than I am for the story, because I'm enamored by the way the writer put the words together. So the true book nerd in every sense of the word, right? And for that reason, I will read some fiction, but the focus is on a good narrative, but with some good writing. And I'm always engaged in other people's stories. So I like biographies, and particularly autobiographies, because who better to tell your own story than you? Yeah. So favorite books, there are so many, but I'll name a couple. So The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand was a favorite of mine for years. I also loved, I always say her name wrong, but Bibi Campbell Moore.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Amazing writer. And so pretty much everything that she wrote, I loved. And I also liked this book. It was written by two best friends. It's called Trying to Sleep in the Bed You Made.
Oh, That sounds interesting. I haven't read that one.
I forget who the authors are. It came out a while back, and they wrote a sequel to it, but it was just a really great story.
Yeah, and I'm anything Toni Morrison. Like I said, the words, the sentences is to the point that I actually keep a journal of favorite sentences from everything, even favorite lyrics from songs, because I like the way the words sound. And I said, oh, I wish I could write like that. So on your children's books, when do you anticipate maybe you're going to have those finished? I know.
Cool. Let me see the
pressure.
Yeah. Well, the one about Charlene Mitchell was supposed to have come out actually in the spring of 2020, but I've resumed working on it. So I'm hoping to get it out in the spring of this year. That's what I'm shooting for. Victoria Woodhull around that same time. And the one for Patsy Mink later in the year, probably in the late summer, early fall.
So what book did you read that made you cry?
It's been a while since I've cried. I tend to cry more in movies than books, but I remember reading a book called A Summer to Die, and that one made me cry. That was junior high. You're taking me back, and I can't remember the author. And I don't think that was the Judy Blume book. There was one book that Judy had written that was very serious, and it was a very different turn from her other books. But yeah, A Summer to Die, that one made me cry for sure.
Cool. So for people who are listening who want to write, because a lot of people do want to write. Yeah. So what tips would you give them for them regarding writing?
I would say expose yourself to different types of writing. So reading is obviously a very important aspect of it. Most good writers read a lot. And also don't limit yourself, because maybe you think that, and I'm just throwing this out there, but maybe you think that you want to be a mystery writer, but it still doesn't mean that it wouldn't hurt to dabble in some other areas, because sometimes the areas you least expect might be a good fit for you, or areas you like or excel in more. I never thought I'd be a medical writer, and here I am.
That's great advice. So do you have a process you use when you start to write? Some people collect all of the information first. Some people just sort of sit down and start writing. Some make outlines. So, I mean, there's 1,000 ways to begin, but what method do you use when you start to write?
It depends on the project, actually, for me. So if it's something like, obviously, if you're telling a historical narrative, for me, an outline is important, because you need to make sure the chronology, the order of the events in which they occurred, that's correct. Sometimes the story comes to me in my head before I can get it out, it's hard to explain that, but sometimes I can see paragraphs, like I can see the beginning, I can see the intro, I can see the ending. And so I'll write that down before I forget it. And then I try to put in the other pieces. And then there are times when I actually will kind of just scribble something out by hand, like a rough draft. And I know that it's nasty, but I look at it and I'm like, okay, this is terrible. Let me look at this and make it better.
So did you always want to be a writer, or did it just come to you that you might try to write?
Originally I did. Yeah. I, as a child, I wanted to write children's books and illustrate them too. So that's another reason why the children, I probably won't illustrate on this run, but in the future I will, or I plan to. And so it was one of those things, like I said before, as I learned more about life, and I had people tell me, well, nobody really makes a living as a writer. That's something they do after they retire. And then I learned that was what Alex Haley did after he retired. And I was like, oh, okay. I thought he was a young man when he wrote all this stuff. And then come to find out it's a different narrative. But then later on, I learned about people like the late, great Eric Jerome Dickey. I learned about Michael Crichton. And these are people who were successful in their previous careers, but they made a pivot. And so I thought to myself, well, if they did it, then, I don't know if I'll be successful, but I owe it to myself to give it a shot.
Yeah, I think Elin Harris he worked a little short while and then he started writing. He was in that Jerome Dickey era too. So yeah, I guess there was a time when you had a job and then you retired and then you wrote, but then it became more mainstream. At some point, some people just enjoyed telling their stories. And like you, a lot of people do see the stories unfold. So that's wonderful. That's a great gift to have. So what does your family think about your writing?
I haven't really asked them what they thought. I think when I first started doing it, I think that they were proud, like doing it at a professional level, I mean. And I think it was kind of surprising. I think for me to quit my job as a pharmacist, first of all, everyone thought I was nuts, right? And so
yeah, they would think you're nuts, right?
Everyone thought I was nuts. One of my friends at one point told me I was having a midlife crisis, like early in life. Like you're 10, 15, 20 years ahead of your midlife crisis, but this is what's happening. Yeah. So, but it's kind of like anything else that sometimes people, not everyone, but maybe some people make what strikes people as being a radical decision. And when you stick it out and then you start to see some fruits from the labor, then people come back and they say, okay, I thought you were crazy, but now I get it.
Yeah, I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the hardest part about writing for you?
I think for me, specifically in the medical writing space, because I've done it for a long time, it's how to make some topics, like the evergreen topics that never get old, how to make them new and fresh.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about, you're right. That would be kind of hard. That's right.
Yeah.
And you have to find new ways to tell me the same thing. So I'll heed the advice or change what I need to change.
Or at least pick it up and read it. That's step one.
Right. That's true. You're right. Because you say, oh God, another flu vaccine. Let's just put that over there.
You have to work for your attention these days.
That's right. You really have to do that. So what's your favorite time to write and why?
Either really early in the morning or late at night. Those are quiet times for the earth. And I mean, even if I'm in my private space, then it's just like, it's me and the moon. And it's just such a peaceful, serene time, if that makes sense.
So how do you, and maybe this only happens to me, but how do you handle it when you're out in the middle of someplace having a great time and then something in this book says you got to write me? How do you handle that?
I've had that happen many times. So I probably will strike you as being the strange bag lady now, but I carry notebooks with me. I also, thanks to technology on my smartphone, sometimes I'll record ideas, record notes. So that's been a nice way. I'll excuse myself, run to the restroom real quick. Hey, I need to tighten up my makeup. And I'm in there and I'm making notes.
I said, oh my God, my stomach's hurting. I got to go to the bathroom. How long I want to be in there, right? I don't want them to be worried about me. So you find early or late the best time for you?
Yeah. And sometimes under pressure. Like, I don't like to be pressured when writing, but sometimes when you've got that glowing deadline and say you've hit writer's block, a deadline can be very, very inspirational.
Yes, it can. And so here's a strange question you've probably never been asked before. What's your favorite word and why?
Huh. I don't know if I have a favorite word. I like different words that are surprising. I like it when words sound like they mean one thing, but they mean something else.
Oh, yeah,
So,
that's cool.
for example, like this doesn't have the best meaning, but I think that Schadenfreude is a really cool word. I don't speak German, but that's one of those German words that infiltrated the English language. But the meaning is not maybe the most positive meaning. So it basically means you take pleasure in someone else's suffering. So it's deceitful, but I just like how the word sounds. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that makes sense. So,
Equanimity, that's a word I like. Maybe that's the whole yoga thing. I don't know. Because, you're maintaining peace when there's like a no matter what the outside environment is.
so if there was a tagline to describe you and you could write it, what would it be?
Oh man. I would have loved to have seen this question in advance. You were asking some really tough questions here. Tagline to describe me. I don't come with an instruction manual.
All right. Yes, that's right. That's right. So give us your website again and instructions on how we can get the book, because people listening to this are going to want the book because it is a fantastic book. So give us that information again.
Okay, so drfriedawileybooks.com is the best website to go to find the book.
And you can find it on Amazon too. For those of you who have Amazon accounts and you go there, you order the book, and then you come back and leave a review. Those are the instructions. Just don't order the book. And if you don't know what to say, just give it the 5 stars that we know it's already worth. Okay. So.
Well, thank you for that. I guess
it's a great topic because no one's really talking about it, and they're talking about it, but sometimes when you read those articles, as you say, they hit over there, or you can't see yourself in that particular conversation, but you've got it covered and we can see ourselves, and we do need to do something to take care of our mental health. And I would suggest you get the book even if you are in the office full time, because you can still get in a rut there mentally. And we need everyone mentally strong and physically healthy. Or is it physically strong and mentally healthy? Okay. We need everyone in that state so that you can have the best life, because you came here to not only have to work, but to have a great time too and live your dreams. So you have to do that. So I want to thank you for joining me today. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And I have one question. So, So, when you were young and writing your books and no one thought that you should do that, what do they think now? I mean, really now?
That's also a tough question. I will say this. I had a childhood friend reach out to me. I've known her since kindergarten. We were next door to each other. And she's written several books, and she looked me up. She said, I was wondering what happened to you after all these years, and it's great to know that you're doing well. So I'm extrapolating that to the larger population to say that I think, or I would like to think, that they knew I was a little quirky, but that I kind of found my groove. That's what I think.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, and I do want to congratulate you on the book. People have no idea how much effort goes into not only writing part. People think that that's the hard part, and it probably is at that time. But the harder part is actually the entire publishing process, choosing the cover, So did you design your own cover or did you work with someone?
I worked with someone and I got a lot of input. If for people who might have been following me on social media, especially on LinkedIn, last year, most of last year, that cover, that's probably like the 8th or 9th version. So going forward, I know that that's like the first thing I need to do, but it was hard to find the right cover that was, you know, appropriate and sensitive, not offending people and different things like that. And I have to give the credit for the pajama pants to one of my friends. She finally said, okay, so just put some pajama pants and make sure that it's something that everybody would wear, color scheme. And I was like, you know what? That's great.
That is great. Because, yeah, when I saw it, I said, this is perfect because everyone would wear those. That's perfect. That is absolutely perfect. I know my last book, I thought about writing one, but I wasn't going to write one. And then I saw a graphic that I loved that actually spoke to the book. And I said, oh, no, God, you tricked me again. So that book cover has that graphic on it. And you're right. It's more, that's more art than science, I think the cover part is what's going to go on there. What do people like? And can you live with it too?
Well, and that's the other thing. So I got some feedback from someone who has written many books and ghostwritten even more. And she said, you're being too much of a perfectionist. And she said most authors actually hate the covers of their books. So, I mean, there are some things still I would do a little bit differently. But I think at the end of the day, you kind of have to find your happy space. What can I live with? And it's more about getting the product out.
That's true.
You can fix the rest later.
That's right. You can fix it later. So how much time elapsed from the time you wrote your first word to the time you got to market?
From the time it got to market, so 9 years.
Yeah.
And the book isn't even that long. So as I said before, it started out as a journal. And then after I really started seeing the value, I felt that I needed research to back things up, to validate it. Because otherwise, if I'm just sharing my story, this was my experience, this is what I went through, it would just sound like I was whining or, oh, I'm a victim, have a pity party. And that's not what I wanted. But I knew if I had the facts to back up what I was saying, then that would make that narrative so much stronger.
And have you been able to get corporate America, who's making all of these changes, pay attention?
I've gotten some attention. I think that there's still a little reluctance. And I think it really comes more from just maybe they feel that it's disrupting the narrative. It doesn't align with the great return to work, right? Because why would someone working in an office space need a book like this? But as you pointed out earlier, there are some tips in there that can help, because there are some challenges that are common to anybody who has a desk job.
Right.
So, not moving around enough, being too sedentary. Even if you work out regularly, there are studies that show that if you sit down for 8 hours at a time, your risk of heart disease is just as high as if you didn't work out at all.
Exactly. And they do overlook the fact that if you're people generally who work 10, 12 hours a day, work 10 or 12 hours a day, no matter where they are, in the office or at home, and they're not getting to the water cooler, and they're hardly taking bathroom breaks. If they are, the bathroom's over there. And then if they're getting lunch, it's because someone bought them a donut and a cup of coffee back. So, so they need those same tips too, because and then if you're home already and you've had some issues, they're going to go with you back to the office.
Exactly. And in some cases, they may be worse, because now you've got to reverse engineer your mind to adapt, to readapt rather.
Right. So one last thing as we begin to wrap up, would you like to leave us with as we eagerly await not only the purchase of this book, but your new book?
A last tip?
Yes.
I would say that self-care, protecting your health, it's a journey. It's constantly evolving. And as I said before, this book I wrote to kind of create that dialogue and serve as a resource, but you may find there are some other things that work for you. So take from it what serves and discard what doesn't.
Exactly, because it is a journey. That's one thing we need to, because we're such an instant society, so we think we can fix it after we get to the last page of that book, and don't have to do the journal now. We're just going to get the last page of the book, and everything's going to be fine. But I encourage everyone to get a copy of the book and actually do the work in the book. And it doesn't matter if you are home full-time, in office full-time, or in a hybrid work schedule. I think that the tips will help you overall, because if something showed up at home when you were working from home, chances are it was just sort of brewing under the surface anyway before you got from home. It's just that working from home was that flashlight that got shined on, that we just, I guess it was a huge light that we just put on it and it showed up. So please get a copy of the book. It's available on Amazon and on Dr. Frieda Wiley's website. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to her. If you go to her website, there's contact information. So what email address can they use to get in touch with you?
Dr. Frieda Wiley Books at gmail.com.
That's right. See, that's easy too. So be sure you reach out to her. I want to thank you very much for being my guest today. You shared a lot of information, and it has been enlightening for not only me, but for those listening. And I know it's going to share a lot of good insights to those who are going to watch this podcast in the future. So thank you very much. I want you to have a great day. Good luck on your next book, because I know it's going to be awesome. So as I always say to my audience, when we wrap up, I want you to trust your greatness. I want you to embrace your power. Make today so good that yesterday gets jealous. I want you to find a heel worth taking, and I want you to take it. And remember, I want you to make today so good that yesterday gets jealous. Okay? So can you do that for me? Above all else, I want you to do it your way. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, the Empowerment Doctor. And as I always say, life is too short to drink cheap champagne. So you guys go have a great day. Thanks for joining us. Hi. This is Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, the Empowerment Doctor, and today I want to encourage you to refuse to be distracted from your goals. Today I want you to affirm, I put my attention on my goals. I reject all distractions. My focus is exactly where it belongs. I choose my decisions and actions based on my goals. There are 3 self-reflecting questions I want you to consider. 1, what am I committed to achieving? Does my focus support achieving that goal? 2, what are the biggest distractions in my life? What can I do to minimize those distractions? And the 3rd question is, what would happen in the next year if I could avoid 90% of the distractions in my life and work on my goals consistently? Remember, I want you to use these steps and the answers to these questions to determine how you can refuse to be distracted from your goals. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, the Empowerment Doctor, and as I always say, life is too short to drink cheap champagne. Dream big. Have a great day.
But life's too short to drink cheap champagne, so I decided to buy me a better brand to taste with my strawberry